Why did everyone look away when she entered the diner, as if she were carrying something contagious, something shameful? The morning light slanted through the windows of Oak Ridge Diner, dust motes suspended in air that smelled faintly of bacon grease and burnt coffee. Addie Thorne tied her apron tight, tugging the sleeves of her uniform down until the cuffs hugged her wrists. Always the sleeves, always the habit of covering. She stepped onto the worn linoleum with the kind of precision that didn't belong to a waitress. Her gait was careful, economical. Every move seemed measured, even when all she was doing was sliding menus across chipped tables. The town had grown used to her. The scars that marked her face, running in pale ridges from temple to jawline, weren't new to locals. They'd stopped starring months ago, but tourists still did, outsiders with restless eyes that lingered too long, whispering behind napkins. Burn victim, some muttered. Car accident, others guessed. Few asked aloud, but curiosity hung in the air like smoke. Addie ignored them all, just as she ignored the ache in her right leg that flared with every long shift. Behind the counter, Reggie the manager barked, "Order up for 7." Without ever looking at her. He never looked at her. That was his way of pretending he was neutral, that he didn't notice the way customers treated her. Neutrality was easier than courage. She gathered the plates and moved through the maze of tables, sidestepping a child darting between booths without breaking stride. Balanced, steady. She had learned balance long before she'd ever carried food trays. She caught her reflection in the chrome of the coffee machine as she passed. The tired eyes, the scarred cheek, the faintest shadow of who she used to be. She adjusted her sleeve again, tightening it at the wrist. Covered, controlled, contained. The bell over the door chimed. A group of 4 men in tailored suits entered, their leather shoes clacking against linoleum. Outsiders. They brought with them a current of arrogance, like they owned the oxygen in the room. One of them, Callum, though she didn't know his name yet, wore a watch that cost more than her monthly rent. His smile was practiced, but it faltered the moment his gaze caught her face. He stiffened, smirked, then leaned toward his companions. They laughed quietly. Kayla, the younger waitress, started forward with menus. "I'll take that table," she offered quickly, her voice too light, too nervous. Reggie didn't even look up from his register. "Addie's section, she's got it." Kayla's lips pressed together. Addie felt the familiar heat rise in her chest but said nothing. She never did. She moved toward the men with menus in hand, expression blank, voice steady. "Good morning, gentlemen. Coffee to start." Callum gave her a glance that was both appraisal and dismissal. "Actually, could we get someone else?" Her spine stiffened, but her tone remained even. "I'll be your server today. The special is club sandwich with house-made potato salad." Reggie glanced up then, eyes flicking between them. He shook his head slightly. No escape. The men took their menus, but their performance had already begun. Dropped napkins, a spilled glass of water, jokes pitched just loud enough for her to hear. Must have been a meth lab accident. "No, no, look at the scarring, that's fire. House fire, maybe." One of them laughed into his coffee cup, as if cruelty was entertainment. Addie moved as if they were invisible. She perfected that skill long ago, ignoring the whispers, the stares, the small humiliations that piled like stones. She delivered their orders, refilled their cups, cleared their plates, all with the same steady professionalism. Inside, though, every word lodged somewhere deeper, somewhere already crowded. At the counter, a man sat alone with his black coffee. Gray hair, posture too straight for a civilian. His eyes tracked her every movement, not the way other men looked at her. Different, observing, calculating. Sergeant Major Elior Blackwood had spent a lifetime reading people, and this waitress moved like no waitress he'd ever seen. He noticed the limp, yes, but also how she scanned exits, how she kept her back to walls, how her hands never trembled, even under mockery. When Callum knocked his silverware to the ground and called out, "More napkins, sweetheart," Addie bent, retrieved the utensils, replaced them with fresh ones. His smirk widened. "Quite the freak show they have working here. Bad for business, if you ask me." Her voice, when it came, was unchanged. "Will there be anything else?" "Yeah," he said, leaning back smugly. "Fresh coffee, this one's cold." It was. The pot had been brewed minutes ago, but she took his cup anyway, refilled it, returned without spilling a drop. He looked disappointed when his attempt at sabotage failed. Blackwood frowned into his coffee. The game was familiar. Bullies. Small tests designed to provoke a slip, and she never slipped, not once. The diner buzzed with its lunch rush, clattering plates and overlapping conversations. A young couple whispered to their daughter not to stare. A family of teenage boys stared anyway until their father cleared his throat. Addie moved through it all with the grace of someone trained to navigate chaos, but her uniform sleeves stayed pulled down, always the sleeves. When the men finally asked for their check, Callum made a show of examining it, high for mediocre service. He wrote a big, fat 0 on the tip line, making sure she saw it. "Smile more," he said with a smirk. "Might help." His companions laughed. One looked away, ashamed. As they stood to leave, Callum bumped her arm deliberately. "Whoops, didn't see you there." The bell over the door chimed their exit. The diner seemed to breathe again once they were gone. Addie cleared their table in silence, cleaning napkins stuffed into glasses, crumbs smeared across laminate. No complaint, no reaction. Blackwood sipped his coffee. The precision of her silence struck him more than any outburst ever could have. He'd seen soldiers endure interrogation with less composure. He leaned forward, voice low but steady. Those men were out of line. She glanced at him, eyes unreadable. "Happens sometimes. More often than it should, I'd guess." She shrugged, turned back to her work. When she returned from the kitchen, his cup was empty. He'd left exact change, and a tip larger than his bill. The afternoon dragged on. Students from the high school filled booths with backpacks and careless laughter. A pair of girls whispered loudly about her scars. "Car accident," one guessed. "Burns," the other corrected. "My cousin's a nurse." They stared openly until Addie returned with their sodas. She set them down gently as though she hadn't heard a word. Her limp grew worse as the hours stretched. 10 hours on her feet. 10 hours of cruel jokes and fake smiles. Yet her face never cracked. Then at 4:45, just 15 minutes before her shift was supposed to end, the bell chimed again. A group of 8 swept in business suits, papers spread across 2 tables, voices full of deadlines and jargon. "We'll need separate checks," the woman in charge announced without looking at her. Reggie caught Addie's eye and shrugged. "Sorry." Addie straightened her apron and approached with the same even tone as always. "Good afternoon. My name, Addie. I'll be your server. Drinks to start." They kept her running for an hour. Substitutions, complaints, snapping fingers as if she were furniture. She endured every command with the same calm rhythm, even as her legs screamed. And then, just when she thought the day couldn't stretch any longer, the bell chimed again. The sound froze her mid-step. Callum and his group had returned. Laughter too loud, confidence too sharp. They chose a booth in her section again, as if drawn back by some unspoken cruelty. "Oh look," Callum announced, loud enough for the whole diner. "Our favorite waitress is still here. Lucky us." The air tightened. Customers shifted uncomfortably. Kayla froze mid-step, coffee pot in hand. Addie steadied herself, smoothing the corner of her notepad with a thumb. Her face was calm. Her voice, when it came, gave nothing away. "Back so soon?" Callum grinned like he'd won something. "With service like yours, how could we stay away?" Blackwood at the far end of the counter set down his mug. His eyes narrowed. Something was about to shift. And Addie knew, with a cold certainty, that the longest part of her day hadn't even begun. Why did they come back? Out of all the diners in town, why this one, why now? Addie stood with her order pad in hand, calm on the surface, but inside her pulse thudded. She had almost made it through the day, almost gotten to the end of her shift without breaking. 15 minutes more and she would have been gone. But now Callum and his entourage had returned, dragging their arrogance with them. The booth creaked under their weight as they leaned back like they owned the place. Their voices carried across the room, louder than necessary, designed to draw attention. Addie could feel the quiet discomfort spreading through the diner. Families with children hushed their conversations. A pair of teenagers stopped laughing and bent closer over their fries. People knew what was coming. 4 beers, Callum said, waving a hand like a king summoning a servant. Whatever's on tap. I'll need to see ID, Addie replied. Callum raised an eyebrow. Really? Her face remained neutral. Really? He rolled his eyes, but he and his companions dug into their wallets. One by one, they slapped down licenses. Addie checked each carefully, methodically. No mistakes, no shortcuts. She nodded once and walked to the counter, feeling his gaze burn into her back. She pulled the tap handles, the foam hissing against glass. Behind her, Callum's voice cut through the air. So, you think she got those scars in prison? Maybe a gang thing. Laughter erupted at the table. Addie carried the beers over, setting each one down with quiet precision. Her hand didn't shake. Her eyes didn't flinch. Food orders, she asked. We'll let you know, Callum replied, turning his back to her. Dismissed. She turned toward the larger business group. The woman with the sharp features raised her glass like a queen. More iced tea. No lemon this time. I said no lemon earlier. She hadn't. Addie nodded anyway, taking the glass without comment. Blackwood watched from the counter, jaw tightening. He could see it, the strain behind her calm. 10 hours on her feet. 10 hours of small cuts and petty cruelties. Yet her movements were precise, her voice steady. He had seen men crumble under less. The business group continued their endless requests. Substitutions, corrections, demands. Addie moved between them and Callum's booth like a machine, her limp deepening, the ache in her leg becoming visible to anyone who cared enough to look. No one did. By now, Callum's group had warmed with beer, their laughter rougher, edges sharper. They ordered nachos, then made a deliberate mess of the platter. Chips scattered across the table, cheese smeared into the laminate. Oops, Callum said, knocking his glass over so the beer spilled across the table and dripped onto the floor. Clumsy me. Addie fetched a towel, knelt to clean the mess. Callum's foot shifted subtly, angling into her path, ready to trip her as she stood. Blackwood's throat cleared, the sound loud and commanding. Careful there, sir. Wet floors can be treacherous. Callum hesitated, withdrawing his foot. His eyes flicked to the older man at the counter, irritation flashing, but he covered it quickly with a smirk. While you're down there, sweetheart, there's some chips under the table too. Addie finished wiping the floor, straightened without a word, and carried the towel back to the counter. Blackwood's eyes followed her. Her composure was remarkable, but her silence was louder than any protest. She reminded him of soldiers he'd known who could endure interrogation by saying nothing, by giving the enemy nothing to work with. The business group finally began to leave. They fussed over their separate checks, each one more particular than the last. One man insisted his salad was off, despite having eaten every bite. The woman with the designer handbag argued over a dessert she had clearly ordered and finished. Addie removed the charge without protest. When the group finally departed, they left exact change, not a penny more. Her right leg trembled now as she carried dishes to the kitchen. The limp was pronounced, the pain obvious if one knew how to read it. Still, her face was a mask. No grimace, no sigh, just efficiency. Blackwood tapped his finger against his coffee mug. He was certain now. This wasn't just a woman who had survived an accident. This was training. This was control. The scars weren't her story. They were just the cover. Callum's laughter grew louder as the business group's absence gave him room to dominate the diner again. Scarface, he called across the room. Bring us the check. We're done here. The diner went silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The cruelty of the nickname echoed. Kayla froze with the coffee pot, her face horrified. Addie's voice was flat, neutral. I'll bring it right out. She walked to the register, printed the bill, returned to the table. Callum took it, made a show of scanning the total. "Split it 4 ways," he ordered. Addie took their cards, processed them with methodical precision. Behind her, his voice carried, "Bet she was pretty once, before whatever happened." His companions laughed, though one shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if realizing they'd gone too far. Addie returned with the receipts. Callum deliberately dropped his pen to the floor. "Pick that up for me, would you?" She bent, retrieved it, set it on the table. Her expression never changed. But Blackwood saw it, the flicker in her eyes. Not anger, not pain, something colder, a calculation. Callum's friend shoved his chair back just as she straightened. The move was sudden, careless. The tray of empty glasses she'd been clearing from a nearby table tilted dangerously. Gasps rippled through the diner, but Addie moved with startling reflex. A twist, a shift of weight, a recovery so precise it looked choreographed. The glasses steadied, not one shattered. But in that motion the fabric gave way. Her sleeve, already strained from hours of wear, ripped from shoulder to elbow. The sound was sharp, final. The diner froze. Her arm was exposed. The scars, yes, but also something else. Something inked deep into her skin. The unmistakable outline of a Navy SEAL trident, unit insignia, a list of names etched with careful precision. The silence was absolute. Callum's smirk faltered, his color draining. One of his companions muttered a curse under his breath. Addie stood perfectly still, tray balanced, her arm revealed for all to see. For the first time all day, she wasn't hiding. And across the room, Sergeant Major Blackwood set his cup down with a deliberate click. He rose, straight-backed, shoulders squared. The air shifted. His boots struck the linoleum with the cadence of a march. Every eye followed him as he crossed the diner, each step louder than the last in the silence. He stopped in front of her, posture rigid, and rendered a crisp, regulation salute. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne," he said, his voice clear, commanding. "3rd Special Warfare Task Group, Kabul Extraction 2022. The name rippled through the diner like a shockwave. An old veteran at the corner table removed his cap. A nurse in scrubs pressed a hand to her mouth. Addie didn't move at first. Then slowly she inclined her head in the smallest of nods. Acknowledgement, confirmation. The truth could no longer be hidden. How long can a room stay silent before it shatters? The diner hung in that silence like a held breath. The torn sleeve dangled against Addie's arm, revealing not just scars but history written in ink. The Navy SEAL trident, the unit insignia, the careful script of names carved forever into her skin. Customers who had once whispered cruel guesses now stared with wide eyes. A boy in a booth stopped chewing his burger mid-bite, frozen. The older man at the counter removed his cap and held it in his lap. The nurse in scrubs gripped her coffee cup as if it might anchor her in the storm of realization. Sergeant Major Blackwood's salute cut through the air, crisp, unshaking. His voice carried weight beyond words. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne, 3rd Special Warfare Task Group, Kabul Extraction 2022. The names fell like stones into a pond, ripples spreading. Kabul Extraction 2022. Even civilians who didn't follow headlines knew the word Kabul, knew what it meant. The fall, the chaos, the desperate evacuation. For veterans in the room, it was more than a word. It was a wound. Addie's chest rose slowly as she breathed in. She didn't return the salute, not fully. Just a nod, small, deliberate. Enough. Callum's face had gone pale, the smug lines erased. His mouth opened once, twice, like a man drowning for words. Nothing came. The pen he had dropped lay forgotten on the table. We didn't know," he stammered finally, his voice thin. "We were just, we didn't realize who you were." Her expression didn't change. She set the tray of glasses down on the nearest table with steady hands. She reached into her apron pocket, drew out a small silver clip, and fastened what remained of her torn sleeve neatly against her arm, not to hide the tattoo, but to display it fully. A decision. Her voice was calm when it came. "Your receipt." She placed the papers on their table. "Thank you for dining with us today." The same words she had said to 100 customers, but now the weight was different, the meaning impossible to miss. Callum's companions shifted uncomfortably. One muttered a curse. Another stared at the names inked into her skin, lips pressed tight. The man who had laughed the loudest earlier now looked at the floor, shame pooling in his silence. Callum fumbled for his wallet, pulling out bills with shaking fingers. He dropped them onto the table, far more than the bill required. Too much. An apology in paper form, flimsy and late. Addie didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. She turned and walked away, her posture no longer diminished but upright, bearing unconcealed. Blackwood dropped his salute only when she moved past him. His voice, quieter now, carried for her alone. "Well done, Commander." She didn't answer, not yet. The diner began to breathe again, but differently than before. Conversations didn't resume. Instead, people looked at her with a respect tinged with unease, like seeing someone they had misjudged and now didn't know how to face. The young mother who had shushed her child earlier now stared openly, guilt etched in her face. The old veteran gave a small nod across the room, a silent acknowledgement from one who knew. Kayla, the younger waitress, stood rooted in place, coffee pot trembling in her grip. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Callum's group departed quickly, gathering their coats and muttering excuses. Their laughter was gone, replaced by hurried shuffling. Callum lingered a heartbeat longer, glancing back at Addie, perhaps hoping for some absolution in her eyes. He found none. The bell over the door chimed their departure. The sound seemed softer than usual. Addie finished her remaining tasks in silence. She delivered a dessert to one table, refilled water at another. Her hands never shook, her steps never faltered, but inside something had shifted. She could feel it in the way her breath came deeper, less guarded. The concealment was gone. Reggie emerged from his office, confusion clouding his face. He had missed the storm. He took in the torn sleeve, the frozen customers, the unusual hush. "What happened out here?" His voice was sharp, managerial, worried about complaints. "And what happened to your uniform?" Before Addie could respond, Blackwood stepped forward, his voice steady and absolute. "A minor incident. Resolved." The tone brooked no argument. Reggie's mouth snapped shut. Addie untied her apron, folded it neatly, and handed it to Kayla. "Table 12 is waiting on dessert. Table 7 just got seated." Kayla nodded quickly, still wide-eyed, as if she'd been asked to carry a sacred object. Reggie frowned. "Your shift ended an hour ago. Go home." She inclined her head once in acknowledgement. No argument, no explanation. In the back room, Reggie followed her. His voice was quieter now, awkward. "About the uniform, company policy says damages come out of pay, but—" He hesitated, cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances, maybe this once." "No need," Addie said. Her tone was level, but something in it made him flush. "I'll cover it." He fumbled, embarrassed. "I didn't know about your service. If I had, well, I would have done things differently." Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching. "Would you? Why?" The question landed heavier than any accusation. Reggie had no answer. His face reddened. He stepped aside as she gathered her backpack and walked past him. Outside, the late summer air was warm, carrying the faint scent of cut grass. Addie paused, breathing it in. For the first time in months, she stood with her posture unmasked. Shoulders square, chin lifted, not hiding, not apologizing for existing. Blackwood was waiting by an old Ford pickup, his stance relaxed but his eyes sharp. He gave her a small nod. "Need a ride, Commander?" She shook her head slightly. "I'm not a commander anymore, just Addie." His lips curved in the barest hint of a smile. "Once an officer, always an officer. That's what they told me when I retired." Her eyes flicked toward him. "How did you know?" "About Kabul." He leaned against the truck, crossing his arms. My nephew was pararescue. He said a crazy SEAL woman with dual quals orchestrated the whole extraction when comms went down. Not many female officers with that profile. He shrugged. Process of elimination. Addie studied him, appreciating maybe his directness. Why here? He asked then, nodding toward the diner behind them. With your record, you could write your ticket anywhere. She looked back at the neon sign buzzing faintly against the fading light. Needed quiet. Somewhere I could just be, figure out who I am without the uniform. And his gaze was steady. Have you? Her lips parted, then closed again. She considered getting there. Blackwood nodded once, like he understood more than he let on. VA group meets Thursdays. Nothing formal, just vets talking it out. Could use someone like you. She hesitated. I'll think about it. He studied her face. Think fast. Isolation eats at warriors. I've seen it. Doesn't end well. For the first time that day, she allowed a ghost of a smile. Thanks for the ride offer. I'll walk. He didn't argue, just climbed into his truck, leaving her with the choice. She walked through town, the evening sun slanting gold across rooftops. Pedestrians noticed her now, not because of the scars, but because of the way she carried herself. Authority had returned, subtle but undeniable. People stepped aside instinctively as she passed. At the entrance to her apartment building, she saw Mr. Gaines, her elderly neighbor, struggling with grocery bags. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, took the load from his hands. Thank you, dear, he said, not even glancing at her arm. His service cap sat crooked on his head. These old bones don't work like they used to. Her eyes flicked to the cap. Korea. He nodded. And you? Afghanistan, she said quietly, and Syria. His eyes widened, but not in surprise, more in recognition. Thought so. You move like one of us. They rode the elevator in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Shared weight, shared understanding. At his door, he paused. You ever talk to anyone about what happened over there? Not really, she admitted. Took me 30 years, he said softly. By then the words had eaten holes in me. Don't make my mistake. She helped him with his groceries, considering his words. When she returned to her apartment, the small space greeted her with its familiar sparseness. Spartan furniture, intentional placement. A bookshelf lined with military history and tactical manuals. A framed Purple Heart. A photograph of her unit before Kabul. She set her backpack down and sat on the balcony as the sky burned orange. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A message from a number she recognized. The veterans group that had been asking her to speak for months. Will you come tomorrow? They need to hear from someone who made it through. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. For months she had said no. For months she had chosen silence. But today had changed something. Slowly, deliberately, she typed, yes. She set the phone down, leaned back in her chair, and let the fading sun wash across her scars. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like hiding. Not peace exactly, but something close, a readiness. Why was her thumb still hovering over the door handle, frozen? The building was plain brick, the kind of place you drive past without noticing. A community center on the edge of town, its faded sign advertising everything from blood drives to bingo nights. But tonight, the side door bore a simple paper taped to the glass. Veteran Support Group, Building C, Room 12. Addie stood in the shadows, the evening air heavy and close. Her scars caught the glow of the parking lot lights as though mocking her hesitation. She had said yes. She had typed the word. But walking through this door felt harder than any mission she had faced overseas. Inside, muffled voices carried. Laughter, too, real, unforced. She wasn't used to hearing that sound in a space connected to war. Her chest tightened. She could still turn around. Go back to her apartment, back to the quiet, back to being invisible. But she remembered the look in Mr. Gaines' eyes when he had said 30 years. She remembered the way Blackwood had warned about isolation. She remembered the diner, the torn sleeve, the moment her past had been dragged into daylight whether she wanted it or not. Her hand tightened on the handle, one breath, too. She pushed the door open. The hallway smelled faintly of floor polish and burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. At the end of the hall, an open doorway glowed warm, voices spilling out. She stepped inside. The room was modest, folding chairs arranged in a rough circle, a coffee urn on a side table, styrofoam cups stacked beside it. A dozen men and women filled the seats, some in jeans and ball caps, others still carrying the posture of uniforms they no longer wore. Ages varied. A young Marine barely out of his 20s, an older Army nurse with gray streaks in her hair, a man with prosthetic legs who shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Conversations quieted as she entered, not in the way of gawking diners but with the weight of recognition. They didn't need explanations. Scars, seen or unseen, were currency here. "Glad you made it," a voice said. Blackwood leaning against the wall near the coffee urn. His presence didn't surprise her. Of course he'd be here. She gave a small nod and found an empty chair near the edge of the circle. The man at the center, thin and wiry with airborne wings tattooed on his forearm, cleared his throat. "We don't do speeches here, just stories, or silence. Both are fine. Anyone want to start?" A younger vet spoke first, his voice hesitant. "I still dream about the convoy, the IED. My buddy, I could." His voice cracked, words dissolving into silence. The older nurse reached over, placed a hand on his arm. He swallowed, nodded gratefully. Others shared. A helicopter pilot talked about the sound of rotors haunting his sleep. The prosthetic-wearing man admitted he couldn't walk past fireworks without freezing. A quiet woman spoke about her husband not understanding why she sometimes sat awake all night, staring at the door. Addie listened. Every word carved a space inside her. Every confession echoed something she knew, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Then someone said it, "Kabul." The room shifted. A Marine shook his head. "I was there. The airport, absolute chaos, still can't shake the screams." His hands trembled as he spoke. "They told us to hold the line, but people were falling, begging. I'll never forget their eyes." Addie's breath caught. Kabul. The word was a wound. Her vision blurred for a moment, the room dissolving into memory. The crush of bodies against the airport gates. The heat suffocating. The roar of C-17s overhead. Dust rising in choking clouds as desperate families surged forward. A child passed over the fence, small hands clutching, reaching. Addie's hands had caught her. She could still feel the weight of the girl pressed against her chest. Gunfire in the distance. Radio chatter breaking apart into static. Her unit scattered, voices lost in the noise. Orders dissolving as the crowd surged. She remembered yelling into her comms, no answer. She remembered Rivera's face when the blast came, his body thrown against hers, his blood mixing with dust. The memory was jagged, unfinished. She blinked, pulling herself back to the fluorescent-lit room. She hadn't realized her hands were clenched. The Marine who had spoken about Kabul noticed, his eyes locking on her. "You were there too," he said softly. Not a question, a statement. The group turned toward her, not pressuring, just waiting. Addie swallowed. Her throat felt raw. For months she had stayed silent, but the silence had teeth. She forced her voice out, low but steady. "Extraction, Task Group 2022. Recognition flared in Blackwood's eyes. Others leaned forward. They knew what that meant, the impossible mission, the one whispered about but never fully told. "I don't talk about it," she added quickly, her hand flexing against her knee. "You don't have to," the nurse said gently. But the words had already cracked something open. She exhaled, the breath shaky. "We lost comms," she said quietly. "Chaos everywhere. Orders didn't matter. People didn't matter to the chain of command, just numbers. We made choices we weren't supposed to make. We pulled who we could. We carried who we could." Her gaze dropped to her arm, the names inked there. She traced one unconsciously. We didn't all make it back. Silence, heavy, respectful. The Marine nodded slowly, his jaw tight. That's why you carry it, the scars, the names. Addie didn't answer. She didn't need to. The nurse leaned forward. You survived what others couldn't. That's not weakness. That's weight. But weight doesn't get lighter when you carry it alone. Addie's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, but the words tangled. She thought of Mr. Gaines and his warning. She thought of Blackwood's steady gaze. Her voice broke softer now, almost a whisper. Sometimes I wonder if survival was the mistake. The group didn't recoil. They didn't correct her. They nodded, some with tears, some with eyes closed. They knew. They had thought it too. Blackwood's voice, steady, anchored her. Survival isn't a mistake, Commander. It's a responsibility. What you do with it, that's the mission now. Her eyes met his. For the first time in months, she didn't look away. The circle moved on, others sharing, the rhythm of confession and silence weaving through the room. Addie stayed quiet again, but the crack in her armor remained. Words she had locked away were loose now, circling. She couldn't put them back. When the session ended, people lingered, chatting quietly, pouring more coffee. Some approached her with simple nods, no questions asked. One young soldier clasped her hand briefly, gratitude unspoken. Blackwood walked with her to the door. Not so bad, was it? She gave him a look. You ambushed me. He chuckled. You walked through the door, that was all you. She hesitated at the threshold. The night air was cool, stars faint in the sky. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was walking into darkness, more like stepping out of it. Still, the memories waited. Kabul was no longer just a scar in her past. It was awake now, alive, demanding to be faced. As she walked back to her apartment, her phone buzzed again. A message from the group organizer. Thank you for tonight. They needed to hear you. Addie stared at the screen, then typed back slowly. I didn't say much. The reply came quickly. Sometimes one sentence is more than enough. She slipped the phone into her pocket. The quiet determination she had felt on the balcony returned, deeper now. She wasn't healed. She wasn't whole. But maybe she didn't need to be. Maybe survival wasn't about erasing scars, but about carrying them without letting them bury you. For the first time she thought, maybe I can. Why did the dreams always start with the sound of children crying? Addie jerked awake in the dark, sweat cooling against her scarred skin. The ceiling of her apartment loomed above her, plain and unthreatening. But her chest heaved like she'd just sprinted through smoke. The sheets twisted around her leg where the old wound still ached, phantom pain laced with memory. She sat up, gripping the edge of the mattress, grounding herself. She was here, not there, not at the gates, not in the chaos. But Kabul was never far. She pushed to her feet, limping toward the kitchen. The fridge hummed quietly as she poured water into a glass. Her reflection stared back from the window above the sink, pale scars in the moonlight, eyes too tired for her age. She pressed her forehead against the glass. For a moment she swore she heard it again. The roar of a crowd, the scream of jet engines, the staccato crack of gunfire. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from the veteran group thread, sleeps the enemy too. Don't let it win alone. She didn't reply, but she didn't turn the phone face down either. By morning she forced herself through the routine. Tie apron, adjust sleeves, walk to the diner, pretend. The bell over the door chimed as she entered Oak Ridge Diner for her shift. Reggie glanced up briefly. Kayla offered a tentative smile. Customers filtered in, most pretending not to stare at her now exposed arm. She rolled her sleeves neatly that morning, the scars and tattoo visible, a decision she hadn't reversed. It changed the air. Whispers were different now. No longer cruel speculation but cautious curiosity, respect tinged with unease. A teenage boy nudged his friend and whispered, "Seal," before looking away quickly. An older woman pressed her lips together, whispering something about heroes. Addie didn't respond to any of it. She moved through her shift with the same precision, but every movement felt heavier. The diner was no longer her hiding place. It was a stage, and she hated it. Between tables, her mind slipped again. The gate loomed in her memory, barbed wire straining as thousands pressed forward. She remembered the heat, the dust, the chaos of bodies desperate for escape. Orders had been shouted, but they were drowned beneath the roar of a crowd that wouldn't stop. Her radio hissed with static. Comms gone. She was cut off. Rivera's voice had carried to her anyway, low but steady. We hold the line. We pull who we can. She had nodded once, and that was all the plan they needed. Back in the diner, Kayla's voice snapped her out of it. Table 6 needs refills. Addie blinked, forcing herself into the present. Got it. She poured coffee with hands that didn't shake, but her chest was tight. The memory clawed at her. Later on her break, she sat outside on the back step, the sun warming the scarred skin of her forearms. She lit a cigarette she rarely smoked, the ritual more about control than nicotine. Blackwood's truck rolled up, rumbling to a stop. He stepped out, his weathered face thoughtful. You didn't come to hide anymore, he said, nodding toward her bare arm. Her lips twitched. Doesn't feel like hiding's an option now. Doesn't have to be a punishment either. She exhaled smoke, watched it drift. Feels like a spotlight, and I didn't ask for it. No soldier ever does, he said simply. She flicked ash onto the step, silence stretching between them. Finally, she asked, you ever wonder if you should have been the one to go instead of the ones who didn't make it? His eyes met hers steady, every day. Her jaw tightened. I carried Rivera out myself. Shrapnel in my leg, couldn't even feel my hands, but I carried him. Didn't matter. He didn't make it. I did. Tell me how that makes sense. Blackwood didn't answer right away. He let the silence hold. Then he said, it doesn't. Not in any way that feels fair. But fairness isn't the measure, Commander. Duty is. You brought him home. That mattered. Her throat ached. She looked away, blinking hard. The flashbacks didn't wait for permission. They surged again that night. She was back at the airport perimeter, the sky tinted orange with dust and fire. Families screamed as the blast tore through the crowd, the concussion knocking her flat. Her ears rang, the world slow and fractured. She pushed up, vision swimming. Rivera was down, chest torn open. Blood everywhere. Go, he gasped. She ignored him. Her body moved on something deeper than thought. She hoisted him over her shoulders, pain searing through her leg as shrapnel bit bone. Step by step she carried him, refusing to leave him behind. Bullets cracked in the distance. A child clung to her sleeve, sobbing. She kept moving, her teeth clenched against screams she refused to release. She remembered the ramp of the aircraft, the blinding lights, the smell of fuel. She remembered collapsing inside as medics rushed forward, Rivera slipping from her grasp. She remembered screaming his name when his pulse faded under their hands. Her own blood had pooled beneath her, but she hadn't let him die in the dirt. She woke again in her apartment, shaking. She pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. The next morning at the diner, Reggie tried small talk. Crazy weather, huh? He trailed off when she gave him nothing, but Kayla lingered nearby, braver. You were really there? She asked softly. In Kabul. Addie froze, tray balanced on one hand. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then simply, yes. Kayla swallowed. I'm sorry, I mean before I didn't. Addie shook her head once. Doesn't matter. But it did. By mid-afternoon, a family came in, 2 parents, 3 kids. The youngest, a girl with wide eyes, stared at Addie's scars. The mother reached to hush her, but Addie knelt slightly, her voice calm. Want some crayons while you wait? The girl nodded shyly. Addie set crayons on the table. The child smiled. For once, it wasn't fear in her eyes. Later, when the family left, the father pressed a $20 bill into her hand. For the crayons, he said simply. His eyes flicked to her tattoo, then back up. Respectful, quiet. That night Addie sat on her balcony with the wooden box in her lap. She opened it slowly. The folded flag, Rivera's name, the Afghan girl's note still creased, still smudged from her small fingers. She traced the words, "Thank you." Her scars glimmered silver in the moonlight. For the first time she didn't see only loss. She saw weight. She saw survival. She saw responsibility. Her phone buzzed again with a message from the veterans group. "Next week, we're inviting families. Some of them need to hear from survivors, too." Her thumb hovered over the screen. This time she didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." Why did the diner feel smaller now, as though its walls had shifted overnight? Addie stepped through the door the next morning with her sleeves rolled, scars and tattoo uncovered. She hadn't planned it, but once she'd fastened the sleeve clip the night before, she hadn't removed it. To hide again would feel like betrayal of Rivera, of the others inked into her arm, of herself. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Conversations hushed, then resumed with new tones. Not the mocking laughter of before, but a charged curiosity. Customers watched her openly now, not in cruelty but in a strange mixture of awe and unease, like people staring at a storm cloud that might or might not break. Kayla nearly spilled the coffee pot when she saw her. "Morning," she said quickly, her voice higher than usual. Addie gave her a steady nod. "Morning." Reggie emerged from his office, tie crooked, face stiff. He cleared his throat. "Listen, Addie, about yesterday. I want to apologize, for the past, too. I should have stepped in when customers crossed the line." Addie set her order pad on the counter. "It's all right." "No," he said more firmly, surprising himself. "It's not, but it will be different now, I promise." She studied him for a moment, then inclined her head once. Acceptance, but not forgiveness. The bell over the door chimed. Locals shuffled in. A farmer with dirt still under his nails tipped his hat. A pair of teachers from the high school nodded in greeting. The teenage boys who had once snickered at her scars sat straighter in their booth. Respect had replaced ridicule, but it came wrapped in awkwardness, as if no one knew the right way to behave around her anymore. At noon, a man in his 30s entered, someone she didn't recognize. He wore a clean polo, his posture stiff. He slid into a booth, ordered coffee. When she brought it, he stared at her arm too long. "You think you're better than us now?" he asked suddenly, his voice low but sharp. Addie blinked, surprised. "Excuse me." "You walk around showing that tattoo, acting like some kind of hero. My brother died over there. Didn't get the chance to come back and play waitress. But you," his voice cracked, "you get to be the survivor." The words cut deeper than the earlier cruelty had. She set the coffee pot down gently, hands steady even as her chest tightened. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. He shook his head, eyes burning. "Sorry doesn't fix it." "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." He pushed back from the booth abruptly, leaving bills crumpled on the table. He walked out without looking back, the bell chiming behind him. Addie stood there a moment, staring at the untouched coffee. The respect of some, the bitterness of others. Both were weights she hadn't asked for. That night she found herself on her balcony again, the wooden box open on her lap. The flag, the note, the names. Her phone buzzed with another message from the veterans group. "Families will be there tomorrow. They'll have questions." She hesitated, thumb hovering, then typed, "I'll come." The next evening the community center was fuller. Folding chairs doubled in rows. Children fidgeted beside their parents. Wives and husbands sat stiff-backed, eyes wary. These weren't just veterans now, but those who lived in the aftermath of their wars. Addie slipped into the room quietly, but heads turned. Some faces brightened with recognition, not of her, but of the symbol inked into her skin. Others looked uncertain, as though unsure whether to trust someone who had survived where their loved ones hadn't. The organizer introduced the session. "Tonight is about bridging the gap. Families don't always know what we carry. Veterans don't always know what to say. We try anyway." One by one, people spoke. A wife confessed she didn't understand why her husband woke screaming. A teenage boy admitted he was scared of his father's silences. An older mother asked through tears why her son had come home different, harder, colder. Addie listened. The air was heavy with grief, with questions that had no clean answers. Then a young girl raised her hand, maybe 12 years old, clutching a notebook. "Why do some soldiers come home?" she asked, her voice trembling, "and others do." The room froze. Eyes turned toward Addie. Blackwood's gaze held hers, steady, urging but not demanding. Her throat tightened. She wanted to stay silent, but the girl's eyes were wide, desperate. Addie took a slow breath. "Because war isn't fair," she said finally. Her voice was low but carried through the room. "It doesn't take the ones ready to go. It doesn't spare the ones who still had more to give. It just takes. And those of us who come back live with the weight of knowing we didn't deserve it any more than the ones who didn't." The girl's lip trembled. Her mother wrapped an arm around her, tears sliding silently down her face. Addie forced herself to go on. "I carried one of my own men to the plane. Rivera, stronger than me, better than me. He didn't make it, I did. I'll never have an answer for why. But I can tell you this: survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new duty, to remember them, to honor them, to live in a way that doesn't waste what they gave up." The silence was thick, heavy, but it wasn't empty, it was listening. The young girl wiped her eyes. "Thank you." Addie's chest ached, but some of the pressure lifted. After the session, people approached her quietly. A father shook her hand, eyes wet. A woman whispered, "I wish my son had had someone like you with him." The Marine who had spoken of Kabul clapped her shoulder, no words needed. Blackwood lingered near the door as she left. "You gave them more than you know," he said. Her voice was tired but firm. "I gave them the truth, that's all I have. Truth's more than enough." She walked into the night air, the stars faint but steady. For the first time in a long time, the weight of her scars didn't feel like chains. They felt like maps, reminders of where she'd been and where she still had to go. Why were they all looking at her, waiting? The diner wasn't silent this time. It was loud, too loud. A group of college kids had wandered in late one Saturday night, voices carrying, beer still clinging to their breath from whatever bar they'd come from. They crowded into two booths, backpacks spilling into the aisle, laughter harsh with youth that thought it was invincible. Addie had felt the change the moment they entered. The buzz in the room shifted, unease cutting through the chatter. She set down plates at another table, her ears tuned. Years of training never left you. She could read tension like a second language. "Hey, Scarface," one of the boys called suddenly. His buddies laughed too loud, covering their nerves with cruelty. The room froze. Not again, not tonight. Kayla stiffened near the counter, coffee pot trembling in her hand. Reggie muttered under his breath, "Don't start." But he didn't move, didn't intervene. He never did. Addie straightened slowly, setting her tray down on the counter. She didn't answer, didn't react, but her silence only encouraged them. "What happened, huh?" another boy jeered. "Mess up in the kitchen, or was it a meth lab like people say?" Laughter erupted again, but it was thinner now, uncomfortable. Blackwood was there too, sitting at his usual spot near the counter. He didn't move yet. His eyes flicked toward Addie, gauging, waiting. Kayla whispered, "Addie, maybe let me." "No," Addie said softly. Her voice was calm, controlled. She stepped forward. The boys shifted, their bravado faltering as she drew closer. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She just stood at the edge of their booth, her scarred face calm, her tattoo visible under the rolled sleeve. "You've had your fun," she said evenly. "Now you're done." The leader smirked, trying to recover his footing. "What are you gonna do if we're not?" Addie's eyes locked on his, steady as stone. "You don't want me to answer that." Silence, the kind of silence that pressed into bones. The boy swallowed, glancing at his friends. The laughter had died, the smirk collapsed. "Check, please," he muttered finally, looking anywhere but at her. She nodded once, turned away, and walked back to the counter. No triumph in her step, just control. The diner exhaled as though everyone had been holding their breath. Kayla's shoulders sagged in relief. Reggie busied himself with the register, pretending nothing had happened. Blackwood's lips twitched into the barest hint of a smile. Later, when the boys were gone, Kayla followed Addie into the back, her hands twisted in her apron. "How do you do that?" she asked. "Do what?" "Not break, not let it get to you. I would have cried or yelled or something. You just stand there and they back down." Addie untied her apron, folding it with precision. "You don't need to yell to be strong. Silence is harder, but it cuts deeper." Kayla hesitated. "Teach me." Addie paused, surprised. The words lingered. "Teach me." She hadn't been anyone's teacher in years. She had sworn she never would again. But Kayla's eyes were earnest, hungry not for glory but for resilience. Addie nodded slowly. "All right, tomorrow after shift." That night she couldn't sleep. The flashbacks came again, but softer this time, fragments of Cobble, Rivera's voice steady in the chaos, the child's small hands clinging to her sleeve, the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. But instead of waking in a cold sweat, she sat up, breathing through it. For the first time, she didn't feel trapped inside the memory. She felt like she could face it. The next day, after the lunch rush, she led Kayla outside behind the diner. The alley smelled of grease and damp asphalt. "First lesson," Addie said. "Posture. How you stand tells people whether they can push you." Kayla straightened awkwardly. "No, like this." Addie stepped behind her, adjusted her shoulders, squared her stance. "Feet grounded, shoulders back. You don't need to be big, you need to be steady." Kayla tried again. This time her frame looked taller, firmer. "Better," Addie said. They practiced in the fatting light, voice tone, eye contact, silence. Kayla stumbled, laughed nervously, but kept trying. Addie corrected her patiently, her voice even. By the end, Kayla stood straighter than Addie had ever seen. "Feels weird," Kayla admitted. "It should," Addie replied. "Strength feels like a costume until it becomes your skin." Kayla's eyes softened. "Was it always your skin?" Addie looked away. "No, it was armor, then it became scars. Now I'm still figuring it out." The following week at the support group, the young Marine approached her after the session. His hands fidgeted, his voice uncertain. You carried someone out, didn't you? Back there, Cobble." Addie met his eyes. "Yes." He swallowed hard. "I couldn't, my buddy, I froze. I think about it every day." She shook her head firmly. "Freezing doesn't make you weak. It makes you human, and you came back. That means you get another chance to carry someone else. That's how you balance the weight." Tears welled in his eyes, but he nodded, jaw clenched. "Thanks, ma'am." She placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. "It's just Addie, and you don't owe me thanks. You owe yourself forgiveness." Walking home afterward, she realized her role was changing. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just surviving. People were watching her, Kayla, the Marine, even strangers. They weren't looking for a hero. They were looking for strength they could borrow, even for a moment. That night on her balcony, she opened the wooden box again. She touched the folded flag, the note, the names. Her scars shimmered under the streetlight. For months she had tried to carry the weight alone, believing silence was safety. But silence had nearly crushed her. Speaking hadn't lifted the weight, but it had spread it, and now others were asking to carry pieces too. Maybe leadership wasn't about orders anymore. Maybe it was about presence, quiet, steady, unshaken. She closed the box carefully, but this time she didn't hide it away under the bed. She left it on the table, visible, waiting. Because she knew now, hiding was over. The next morning at the diner, Kayla greeted her with squared shoulders, posture steady, voice firmer than before. Addie felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not in herself, but in someone else carrying a little of what she had once thought was hers alone. She moved through the day with her scars uncovered, not waiting for whispers, not shrinking from stares. For the first time, she didn't feel like a ghost of her old life. She felt like a bridge between who she had been and who she might still become. And in that quiet realization she knew, the mission wasn't over, it had only changed. Why did the morning light look different on the stainless steel coffee machine? Addie caught her reflection as she tightened her apron. The same scars traced her cheek, the same tired eyes stared back, but something had shifted. She didn't tug her sleeves down anymore. She didn't shrink into corners or walk with her chin lowered. The woman in the reflection stood steady, scarred, strong, seen. The diner hummed with its usual rhythm, clattering plates, the hiss of the griddle, Reggie muttering about orders under his breath. But beneath the ordinary was something new. Customers still stared sometimes, but now their eyes softened when they did. Respect had replaced ridicule. Even when awkward, it was no longer cruel. Kayla passed her with a pot of coffee, shoulders squared, posture deliberate. Addie gave her a nod, a silent acknowledgement. Kayla's lips twitched into a smile just for a moment before she turned to pour for a table. The bell over the door chimed. It was Callum this time. Not business suits, not arrogant laughter, just ordinary people. A mother with her teenage son, an elderly couple, two mechanics in coveralls. They filled the booths, the room settling into its routine. Addie moved among them, efficient and precise, but something in her movements was different now, not invisible, not diminished. Each step carried weight. Each word landed evenly. At one table, the teenage son whispered to his mother, eyes fixed on Addie, tattoo. The mother leaned close, murmured something, then stood abruptly and approached the counter. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "My son, he lost his uncle overseas. He never really knew how to talk about it. Would you mind if he asked you a question?" Addie hesitated, then nodded. The boy shuffled forward, awkward, hands stuffed in his hoodie. His voice cracked with youth. "Did it hurt? Not the scars, I mean losing your friends." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. Conversations quieted, ears leaning closer. Addie crouched slightly so her eyes met his. "Yes," she said softly, "it hurts every day, but hurt isn't the end. Hurt means they mattered, it means they're still with me." She touched her tattoo, the names etched there. "This is how I carry them, not as a wound but as a reminder." The boy swallowed, nodded once and retreated to his mother. The diner breathed again, conversations resuming. But the words lingered, settling into those who had heard them. Later on her break, Addie stepped outside. The town stretched before her, familiar streets bathed in sunlight. She lit a cigarette but didn't smoke it, just held it between her fingers, watching the curl of unlit tobacco. Blackwood's truck rumbled to a stop at the curb. He stepped out, leaning against the door. His eyes studied her, the way they always did, reading what others missed. "You're different," he said finally. Addie raised a brow. Scars didn't change overnight. "No," he said, "but how you carry them did." She exhaled slowly, flicked the cigarette aside unlit. "People keep asking questions. Kids, families, even Kayla. They look at me like I'm supposed to have answers." "Maybe you do." She shook her head. "I'm no saint, Blackwood. I've made mistakes, carried men who didn't make it, left behind people I couldn't save." His gaze didn't waver. "And yet you're still standing. Sometimes that's the only answer they need." Her throat tightened. She looked away toward the diner windows, where Kayla laughed nervously with a customer, her posture straighter than it had ever been before. "Maybe," Addie whispered. That evening the support group gathered again. Families filled some seats, veterans filled others. Addie didn't sit in the back this time. She took a chair in the circle, sleeves rolled, scars visible. The young Marine spoke about nightmares, but this time his voice was steadier. The nurse admitted she had finally told her husband what she carried. The prosthetic-wearing man described trying to dance with his daughter again. When the circle quieted, eyes turned to Addie. She didn't flinch under their weight. I used to think survival was punishment, she said, voice calm. That making it back when others didn't mean I was weaker, not stronger. I tried to hide, to disappear. But scars don't disappear when you cover them. They wait. They remind you. She paused, tracing the ink on her arm. Now I think survival is a mission. Not to pretend nothing happened, but to live in a way that honors those who didn't come home. To carry them forward not as ghosts, but as part of me. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was steady, rooted. Afterward, people came to her quietly. Some with tears, some with nods, some with simple thank yous. She accepted each one with the same calm grace. Walking home under the streetlights, she felt the weight of her scars less like a burden and more like a compass. Not erasing what had been, but guiding what could be. At her apartment, she left the wooden box open on the table. The flag folded neatly, the note from the Afghan girl beside it, the names inked into her arm reflected in the glass of the window. She didn't hide them anymore. She didn't need to. The town would still whisper, some would still resent her, some would idolize her. But she knew now, she wasn't here to be invisible and she wasn't here to be a monument either. She was here to live, one day at a time. And as the night deepened, she sat on her balcony, the scars on her skin catching the moonlight like silver maps. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.